Mount Meron, the Upper Galilee, 235. Rome is falling into crisis on all conceivable fronts. Less than 20 years ago, the Jewish nation seemed to be on the road back to greatness, but now all the empire has entered its darkest hour, from which neither Jew nor Gentile can escape. Seeking guidance, Rabbi Joshua ben Levi meditates by the tomb of the great mystic and anti-Roman firebrand Simon Bar Yochai. Suddenly, he receives a vision of the biblical prophet Elijah. Joshua pleads with his vision. "When will the Messiah come?" he asks. "Ask him," Elijah said. "The Messiah is at the gates of Rome." 136. 99 years earlier. Just before his execution at the hands of Emperor Hadrian, Rabbi Judah ben Bava sent what remained of the great Sanhedrin to the village of Usha, where the ordination of rabbis could continue in secret. Well, 2 years later, Hadrian was dead. The new emperor, Antoninus Pius, had a much more favorable attitude towards the Jews, and by 142, the great Sanhedrin had reassembled, headed by Simon ben Gamliel II, one of the few survivors of the fall of Betar. But Usha was no great capital, and for several decades the Sanhedrin found itself bouncing around various Galilean cities in search of a worthy home. During this time, a fierce debate erupted between Simon ben Gamliel and Simon Bar Yochai over the relationship between the Jewish people and the Roman Empire. Ben Gamliel preferred a policy of recognizing the mercy of Antoninus. Bar Yochai would not have this. "Your beloved Antoninus has relieved us. He has not liberated us. Where is our temple? Can we now set foot even in our own city without losing our lives? You have forgotten the fate of Rabbi Akiva. That is the Roman way. We can only defy it." This may have been too much for Simon ben Gamliel, who, let us not forget, was a survivor of the fall of Betar. Eventually, even Bar Yochai's students tired of his anti-Roman sermons and reported him to the Syrian governor. He was executed in the final months of Antoninus Pius's reign. But while Bar Yochai would never be forgotten, the leaders of the great Sanhedrin ultimately did endeavor towards friendship with Rome. And when a great leader of Jewish descent rose up to challenge the power of Rome, the Jewish people would not stand behind him. Though not Jewish by law, Avidius Cassius was the rightful heir to the Armenian branch of the Herodian dynasty, as well as a descendant of Emperor Augustus. In April 175, rumors spread throughout the region that the current emperor, Marcus Aurelius, had died of illness. Upon hearing this, Avidius proclaimed himself emperor, but was killed by one of his own men when it became clear that Aurelius was very much still alive. However, after moving against Cassius, Aurelius toured the region, bringing him into contact with the new Nasi of the Sanhedrin, Judah I, better known simply as Judah HaNasi. Aurelius did not make any changes to Roman policy against the Jews, but he did maintain cordial relations with the Sanhedrin, and began a fierce correspondence with Judah. Their discussions live on today in the writings of the Talmud, wherein the emperor is confusingly referred to as Antoninus. In 189, fearing that the oral teachings of the previous centuries would be lost, Judah began compiling the Mishnah, the collected judgments and deliberations of the great Sanhedrin dating back to the death of Hillel the Elder. Now, the Mishnah is the main reason that we've gone from one episode covering a scant 18 months to one episode covering a whole century. The Mishnah was a legal compendium, not a history book. If a piece of Jewish history wasn't strictly relevant to the facts of a case at the time it took place, it wasn't included, and if it was glancingly referenced at best. For additional context, we have to rely on non-Jewish historians like St. Jerome or Cassius Dio, whose work is often at odds with the Mishnah because the authors themselves weren't intimately familiar with Judaism, and because they tended to refer to Jewish figures by their Greek or Latin names, whereas the Mishnah used their often quite different Hebrew names, and it's often hard to tell who is who in each document. Editing and assembling 2 centuries of legal judgments was a monumental task, and it would require the kind of tranquility that Marcus Aurelius had spent his reign bringing to the Roman Empire. But that tranquility was short-lived. In 193, the same year that the great Sanhedrin finally found a permanent home in the Basilica of Tiberias, Marcus Aurelius's tyrannical son Commodus was assassinated without an heir, kicking off the year of the 5 emperors. Unlike the orderly procession of short-lived claimants that defined the year of the four emperors, most of the provincial governors contesting the succession to Commodus rose up at once. The East, as well as much of Rome itself, rallied around the governor of Syria, Pescennius Niger. But Bar Yochai's anti-Romanism cast a long shadow over the Sanhedrin, and Niger had been cruel to the Jews. Thus, even while under Niger's dominion, Judah and the Sanhedrin instead embraced his chief rival, Septimius Severus. While Roman in all manners of living, Severus was of Carthaginian descent. He was born in Africa and spoke Punic as his first language, the closest linguistic relative to Hebrew. He even included Jews in his social circle in Rome. And as luck would have it, within a year, Severus had gained the upper hand against Niger at Issus. In 201, Severus returned to Syria on a goodwill tour following his victory over Parthia. Passing through Tiberias, the emperor was joined in his journey by Judah HaNasi, who eagerly relayed all that had happened across the land over the past 2 centuries, sparing no detail in his telling of the atrocities committed by Rome. Finally arriving at Aelia, Severus was taken aback when Judah was unable to enter the city gates, and finally amended Hadrian's prohibitions against a Jewish presence in the Holy City. After much negotiation, a very small community of Jews was allowed to resettle in the city and construct a synagogue on the Temple Mount. Jews could also be buried on the neighboring Mount of Olives, beginning the massive cemetery that exists there today. Severus did not travel alone. Tagging along for the ride was his 12-year-old son, Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Caracalla. Caracalla never forgot his journey to the former Jerusalem, so when he succeeded his father as emperor in 211, he lavished even more gifts on Judah, restoring to his name huge tracts of land confiscated from the Jewish people after the Bar Kochba revolt. He even outfitted the Sanhedrin with a coterie of Gothic guards, lest anyone in the land try to stop Judah from completing his work on the Mishnah. Caracalla was right to ensure the completion of the Mishnah, as he would not live to see it. Despite his partiality toward the Jews, Caracalla was, and is rightfully remembered as, a murderous despot, and was assassinated after, let me look this up, massacring his own wedding as a pretext to start a war with Parthia, which he immediately lost. Goddamn, dude. Not long after, Judah completed the Mishnah, dying soon after in 218. With its conclusion, the era of the rabbis known as the Tanaim, also known as the Mishnaic period, ended, and the age of the Amoraim, the speakers, began. And not a moment too soon. Caracalla's death brought yet more chaos, more rival claimants, ultimately setting the empire on the path to what is now known as the crisis of the 3rd century. All of which brings us back to the vision of Rabbi Joshua at the tomb of Simon Bar Yochai. In his vision, Joshua goes to Rome and meets the Messiah, who says he will come today. But when he returns to Elijah, no one has arrived. Elijah explains that the conditions of the Messiah's coming have not been fulfilled, as the people are unwilling to hear his voice. Help was not on the way. Special thanks to my patrons, including Geonim level patrons Lev Cham and Vicky Nelson. If you like this and want to support the channel, you too can become a patron on Patreon, linked in the description below. You can also find links to my sources for this video in the description, as well as a link to my book, An Armada of Cats Travels in Israel. Otherwise, you can always like, share, and subscribe. I will see you next time.